All right, guys, so we have got 3 weeks to go until we are planning to sail across the Atlantic Ocean. And at this point, our to-do list has a lot of somewhat meticulous and small projects that just, we have to pay attention to the details. It's not like you see some huge, cool new improvement by the end of it, but they're just as important as all of the other items on our to-do list. And it kind of makes me think of the term seamanship. On the one hand, when you think of seamanship, you think of some salty, bearded sailor like holding on to a giant wooden wheel while like navigating a boat through a huge storm, right? This concept that seamanship is this skill that you exercise in the moment. I mean, that's definitely true. There's a lot of procedures that you have to be able to carry out while in difficult conditions to keep the boat and crew safe. But the other definition I've heard for seamanship is the art of uneventful passage making. And the idea being uneventful, not in the sense that it's not beautiful, that it's not this amazing experience, but that you don't have any negative events during the passage. A lot of that work that goes into making a passage safe and uneventful happens now, happens weeks or months before the passage. And that's what we're going to be doing in this episode. We're going to be exercising our seamanship with a bunch of small projects. We're going to figure out a secure way to mount our outboard engine. We finally finish our furler installation. We create an emergency storage locker for our life raft and safety gear. We inventory our spare parts. Wow, there is nothing more exciting than spreadsheets. And we make sure that our steering system is bulletproof. So let's get it done.
I'm Desiree, and this is my husband, Jordan. We're sailing around the world, or at least trying to. We made it as far as Panama on our first boat, Atticus 1, which was a really small fixer-upper. Now we're on our dream sailboat, Atticus 2, but she needs some work before she's ready to cross oceans. So we're working hard to finish up the last of our boat projects so we can set sail on our biggest adventure yet, crossing the Atlantic Ocean.
All right, so today I checked off a big project on our to-do list, and that is to figure out our outboard stowage solution. And I really like it. I mean, this is probably where we're going to store our outboard every time that we're moving the boat. Now, if we're sailing in protected waters or motoring in protected waters, we'll also have the dinghy in the davits, just like this. That way the dinghy by itself isn't all that heavy, so the davits don't have to deal with a huge amount of weight. And then the outboard, which is pretty heavy, is securely mounted to this really extensive and strong stern rail. So to hoist the outboard up onto the bracket, we basically take one of the block and tackles from the davits, extend it, and attach the top to this rail that Pacific Seacraft welded onto the top of the solar arch. I'm then able to hoist the outboard using that block and tackle, and then easily pull it in and over the stern rail bracket. Now this bracket is actually made by Edson. Edson is one of those companies that if we're looking to buy something and they build it, we always choose Edson. Now this bracket was pretty easy to install. I did need to install this U-bolt, so I had to drill the holes into the bracket itself. Now, this 20 horsepower outboard is a big outboard for this boat. It's kind of a pain to manage, but having a big outboard and a really rugged, robust dinghy was a huge priority for us because we know firsthand how much better cruising and exploring the world by sailboat can be when you have a fast dinghy that can get you long distances even when the water is a little bit choppy. So whether it be free diving or exploring mangrove mazes, provisioning, or epic dinghy rides into the jungle, this big outboard and that dinghy are crucial components to us having a really awesome experience while cruising. Okay, so I've got one more thing that I've got to do before the furlers are 100% done. Basically, at the very top of the Genoa furler, or the forestay, the angle between the halyard and the forestay itself has to be more than 10 degrees. If it's not, there's a risk that as the furler and the extrusion spins, yes, I said extrusion, there's your drinking word for today. As the extrusion spins to furl up the head sail, the halyard could actually spin with it and get wrapped around the forestay, which would be really bad. It could damage the gear. Also would make it so that we couldn't furl the head sail, which could get really dangerous. So to fix that, I'm gonna install this halyard fair lead, mount it onto the mast so that it makes the angle of the halyard versus the forestay greater than 10 degrees. Okay, cool. So that definitely looks like that angle is now much more than 10 degrees, so we should be good to go there. And that means that we are done with the furlers. Finally, nothing more to do. Oh, let's move on. All right, so today is kind of a big day for me. I'm going to begin the inventory for Atticus 2. So it's kind of a big project. I'm not going to completely fill out the inventory today. Ultimately, what I want that inventory to be is where do we have everything that we have on the boat, right? The real issue here is that I buy stuff that I know we're going to need in the future. I store it somewhere deep in some storage compartment on the boat, and then in like a month or two later, I cannot even remember that we have it, let alone where I put the thing. And the reason I want to start today is because I just ordered a whole bunch of engine spares that we're going to need for the crossing. So I've got oil filters, I've got fuel filters, I've got belts, air filters, raw water pump impellers, O-rings for the heat exchange, all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to make sure that before I stow all of this, I enter it into our inventory. Basically, I'm just going to enter like what it is, how many of them we have, what region of the boat that it's in, so like quarter berth, main cabin, and then exactly what compartment in that area it's in. And in fact, I even got a new starter right here for the engine, which might seem a little bit silly to have a spare starter, but for those of you that saw we blew our starter in the middle of the jungle, you know, it can really come in handy having a spare starter on board. I mean, we've basically got everything that we need to make sure that we can get back to civilization if we need to. All right, so now it's time for me to do a little bit more preventative maintenance on one of the most important systems on the boat, and that is the steering. Now, the issue that we've been having with this steering setup is that whenever the wheel moves or when the rudder moves, we see that this top plate on the pedestal kind of shifts back and forth. Now, I've done a lot of research, and it appears that the reason that this is happening is basically this top plate needs to be securely fastened to the pedestal housing itself. And if you look here, this fastener, as well as a couple of the other fasteners in this top plate, are not really tight. They're not holding the top plate securely to the pedestal. Now, I've tried to tighten these fasteners in the past, and they're totally frozen. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is remove these fasteners, and I'm going to be using PB Blaster, which is a penetrating oil, to try to get the corrosion inside of these threads to loosen up so I can pull these fasteners out. All right, so got the new fasteners in nice and tight, and yeah, there's absolutely no movement in the top plate. So mission accomplished, that's all good to go now. Now, I got a good look inside of the mechanism of the pedestal, and all the gears and everything looked really good. One thing I do need to do to this thing though is you can see that the gasket that I pulled out from between the top plate and the pedestal is just totally shot. And so I've got to order a new one of these, and at some point here when it comes in, I'll put that in. One last thing that I do want to do to the pedestal though, as I move the wheel back and forth, you can't really see it, but I can feel that there's a little bit of play in the wheel before it actually starts to turn the rudder. So what I actually think it's coming from is the rod ends down in the steerage. Basically, the way this pedestal works is when I turn this wheel, that spins a tiller down below the pedestal. That tiller is connected to a tiller that's attached to the rudder shaft. Now the thing that connects those two tillers is a rod, and on either end of that rod are rod ends. Basically, these things just thread onto either side of that rod and allow a lot of articulation between the rod and the thing the rod connects to. The problem is that over time, these wear down and there ends up being play, and the more play there is, the more wear there is. It kind of accelerates the process. I'm going to go down there, I'm going to pull those old rod ends off, I'm going to replace them with these new ones. Okay, so there you go. Basically zero play in the wheel now. I'm feeling really confident about the steering system. All right, so this next project is a really quick one. All of the deck fills on deck, so like the little fill points for our water, for our diesel, as well as the pump out deck cap, all the O-rings on those caps are getting a bit old, getting pretty hard and brittle and deformed, and I want to make sure that on our Atlantic crossing we're not getting salt water that's kind of washing up on deck, leaking down into our water tanks, or in particular our diesel tank, because that would just totally ruin our day. So just to be safe, I removed all of the old O-rings and replaced them with new ones. This is the kind of project that seems like it would take 5 minutes, but most of the time is actually taken up sourcing the O-rings themselves. I needed to figure out exactly what the dimensions of the O-rings were, as well as what material of O-ring to use. This can be a long process when trying to navigate a website like McMaster Car that sells like everything ever made by anybody. So while I've been doing a lot of these boat projects to get Atticus 2 ready for the Atlantic crossing, Desiree's been doing a ton of research on safety equipment, life rafts, all the gear stuff that we need to stay safe in an emergency while we're sailing across the Atlantic. And so we just now received our life raft. So it's actually a really small, compact life raft. We went with the Winslow Ultralight Offshore raft. The reason it's ultralight is because it's got a little bit shallower freeboard. They kind of specialize in lighter weight life rafts. They use a slightly more modern, lighter weight material that allows the actual size of the life raft to be smaller, as well as the weight. The other thing that makes this super light and small is that it doesn't actually have any emergency provisions inside, which is totally fine because we're going to make sure that we have a ditch bag right next to this life raft. We did this for a couple of reasons. First of all, we knew that we wanted to put our life raft in a compartment in a valise. This is a valise. Don't call it a bag. They'll get mad at you. The reason we wanted to do that is so that we could have all of our safety equipment in one single locker. So that if the boat starts to sink, if the boat catches on fire, and we've got seconds to be able to deal with the situation, we can open one single locker and get our life raft, our ditch bag, our flares, all of our emergency equipment. We figured that this locker would be accessible to us just about no matter what the conditions are, but the opening here is not all that big. So we were limited to life rafts that weren't super huge, that could fit the opening of this locker. Before we can actually fully utilize this space, we've got to put in a structure that will protect the autopilot ram and steerage. The guys from Pacific Seacraft were able to come by and do a bunch of measurements and actually put together a template for a box that would protect all of this stuff. And right now they're on their way here to finalize that design and hopefully install that box today. This box is something that I definitely could have built on my own, but it would have taken me forever, and it wouldn't have turned out nearly as good. And at this stage, it's going to be a mad sprint for us to finish everything on our to-do list before we leave for the crossing. So the time I saved on this project is really going to help us make our departure date. All right, so Alex is all finished with our autopilot box, and I'm super happy with it. He did such an amazing job. It's really strong. One cool thing that we did when designing this box is we put a little inspection hatch that I can open up really quickly in order to pull the quick release tab on the autopilot. So basically, if the autopilot were to freeze up and like not be able to move at all, we'd need to disconnect it from the rudder shaft in order to actually steer the boat with the wheel. But most importantly, I'm pumped that we have an easy to access storage area where we can put our life raft, we can put our ditch bag, all of our other emergency gear that we're gonna be getting shortly, all in one place, one-stop shop in the event of an emergency. It's kind of funny to put so much work and effort into a locker that I really hope we're never actually going to need to open or use. So we were able to cross off a couple of items on our to-do list this week. We installed the outboard bracket, we got all the spares that we're gonna need, we did the steering system maintenance, and we just about finished the item of life raft, safety gear, and ditch bag. We obviously installed the box and have the life raft in hand. Desiree is still working on getting all the safety gear that we need for our ditch bag. And in fact, if you're interested in helping us out by buying some of the safety gear that we need, you can check out our Amazon wish list, where we've got everything that we still need safety-wise for the boat. And you can find that link in the description below. And so, as you can see, we're definitely getting through this to-do list and we're coming down to the end, but we're also really running out of time. So the next 2 weeks are gonna be serious go time for us. I mean, we've got a lot to do in a very small amount of time. So hope you guys enjoy the journey of getting Atticus 2 ready for this epic adventure, and I will catch you guys next week.